when I found out what she was up to and was invited to be a curator, I was so excited. I had a long list of, it's like when you think about it, you think, who would I invite to tell stories? There's so many people. So I think it's a seed that can move around. I'm excited about that possibility. So I wanted to get to know people from that I didn't know, for one. And you each have, I'll introduce the people, I'll tell you who I invited, but just so you know, you have 5 cards, and each person that speaks, Bonnie and Scott will speak as a team, but you'll jot their name down as they introduce themselves, and then as they tell their story, if you're inspired by something they say, jot it down. So it's a way to attune to a story. You can do it during the story if you want, or afterwards I ring a little bell and there's just a little pause and you can write it down then. And it may be several things. It might be an image, a pair of shoes, or a dealership, or whatever the image is, you might jot that down, or something somebody says. So that's the form. The stories have power, and they're teachings. So this is how I approach stories. They're kind of a teaching opportunity. So everybody I met, I'm learning from their stories, I'm learning from their character. So I thought, well, who should I ask? And I really, looking around the forests, I really wanted to invite a forester. I didn't know a forester. I'd met one forester, but he wasn't here now. So I was like, who do I know? So I got a hold of Brad Catton, who is a forester around here, and he works for the state, and he agreed, and I was thrilled to meet him and learn more about his work and begin a conversation about the forests here. And it's like a doorway into that world, so I was very happy he said yes, and here he is. And I was looking for a plant that was that would attract butterflies and bees. And the woman I asked said, oh, you should go out to Blackberry Bog Farm and look at their plants. And I said, okay, so that's where I went, and I met Scott. And he was such a great tour guide of the plants out there and this beautiful property, and told me about this diary, and I said, do you want to tell a story? And he said, yeah, I want to tell it with my wife. And I went, great, you'll tell it together. So Scott and Bonnie Thompson are going to tell their story and invite another spirit into their story who lived there long before them. But that'll be their story. Dinah Urell, I've known Dinah. She was one of the first people I met here, and what an extraordinary cultural cultivator she is here with her work. Plus she's a Finn, and I thought, good, I want a Finn. The Finns are like, they're such strong people. They've built so much out here. The town burned down, they built it back, they're like in 2 years. I'm like, I can't even get a website together, and so they're just these strong people, and she is the representative of the Finns and culture in Astoria, like primo. So would she tell a story? Yes, she would. What story? Well, how did you start the newspaper? So we got started that way. And then I had seen Lam do his story at the college, and he had a show, and it was on the anniversary of the, quote, end of the Vietnam War. And it was a powerful experience. And with all that's going on now in the world, I feel like we need to hear from a refugee of a war, and somebody who's made his home here and is a very creative artist. So it was just a pleasure getting to curate this, meet people, and then bring them together for our evening tonight. So thank you all for coming. Let's see, I mentioned the cards. I just wanted to also read a couple of quotes. The community and storytelling are such partners, you know. And I've been carting these quotes around in my writing portfolio for years, so I thought, well, maybe I'll bring them out. They kind of address this. This is from the essayist Wendell Berry. It's from the Jackson Hole Weekly Interview, another independent newspaper. What happens to our sense of community if we create pockets of like-minded people, he's asked. Wendell Berry replies, I can't talk much about intentional communities. I've never lived in one. My community is an unintentional one. This gang of people just turned up, and it raises perhaps more interesting questions than the intentional community. A diversity of people with their diversity of opinions, good and bad habits, prejudices. How do they avoid exploiting or killing each other? How do they get along? How do they keep the local conversation going? So that's what we're doing. We're keeping the local conversation going. And I'd like to also acknowledge that we are on the unceded lands of the Chinook Nation, and invite the ancestors who have lived here before us in, and offer our stories to our ancestors, all of our ancestors who have lived here, who have brought us to this place. So with that, I will begin my story. So my father, John W. Banyas, John William Banyas, was born on July 17th, 1917, so he would have been 108 today, in a coal town. It wasn't a town, it was a coal camp, in coal mining camp in West Virginia. His father was a coal miner, and he disappeared from the scene in 1920 when my dad was 3. So this was at the height of the mining wars in West Virginia. And there was a lot of violence going on then. So that was what my father was born into, this world of immigrants and violence and hard work. So when he was dying, he was 90 years old, and he was in his last days in Ohio, back in Ohio. And he was in a lot of pain, so he was on morphine. So it was a time when the conversation was very fluid and really interesting. So I've unpacked some of that over the years, but things would come up. So we're sitting at the kitchen table one day with my brother, whose birthday also is today, Brother John. And we're sitting there, I don't know, talking. My dad goes, I vote for Paul Heisted. I'm like, what does he mean exactly, you know, because it's kind of drifty in his head. So my brother and I were, what do you think he means? So I started thinking about it. I mean, this was a flash, you know, but I realized Paul Heisted was, my dad had a car dealership. He had a car dealership in Chillicothe, Ohio, and Paul Heisted was his main mechanic. And Paul showed up every day, you know, ready to work. And he was a good mechanic, and he was a strong man. He was a faithful man, and he was a good worker. And I thought, wow, he's describing a quality of work, a work ethic. Dad had built his business, you know, around a good relationships with people, good work ethic, had a profit sharing plan in place, and Paul was a part of the growth of this business. And so I thought, well, you know, he was really proud of it. Paul represented this pride in work, you know. Dad liked to tell the Toyota story. The Toyota story was, he and Mom were in at a Pontiac convention in Hawaii and rented a Toyota. And he'd never driven a Toyota, you know, and they went all over the island, the big island. No, it was Hawaii, all over Hawaii in this Toyota. And he goes, Edith, this is a good car. You know, he comes back and he said, this is a really good car. And he went up to GM and he said, he sold GM cars, Pontiac, Cadillac, Buicks. And he said, you guys should get this car and haul it over here and take it apart and build it. And you know, that they kind of blew him off. And he thought, well, I'll build it, I'll get a franchise. So he got a Toyota franchise and built this business around Toyota. When he retired, General Motors sent him, for his many millions of dollars worth of sales, a fountain pen. A fountain pen. And that gesture from General Motors broke his heart. He brought that up several times. After all that effort, all that visionary work, all that hard work, a fountain pen. So he could see what was coming and was naming that, I think, in the Paul Heisted statement. And I'll just take one more minute here to close out, but the last conversation I had with him, where he was able to get up and out, we sat in lawn chairs in the driveway and had our last scotch together. Dad was looking out at the sky and this beautiful October day, and we clinked our scotches, and he said, you know, I was just a little boy in West Virginia. And then he said, Susie, I'm learning. Well, what are you learning, Dad? I'm learning that there's more and more and more to life. It doesn't end here. I'll ring the bell for the end of each story.
I'm Dinah Urell, and this is a tale of Hipfish. There's no business like fish business, there's no business I know. Nothing makes you work a jillion hours, nothing ever makes you smell so bad, nothing makes you want to take a shower. I'm growing scales, I'm going mad. There's no business like fish business, there's no business I know. If you take the money that you make in a haul, stick it away behind a bedroom wall, maybe you'll be lucky enough, by gall, to start your own cannery. So on with the fish. Cut to the foot of 11th Street in Astoria, early 1997. I'm standing there on the dock, looking out at the beautiful pilings right behind what is now the Astoria Brewing Company. At that time, it was just an empty building. And of course, the fish market was there. And I was just standing there enjoying the scenery, and all of a sudden I had this sort of time out of place sort of vision, and it was like a council of voices speaking to me. And it really was like, you know, you're looking out at the landscape, but right now I'm in a different place. And those voices said to me, you know, this alternative paper idea that you're thinking about doing, it's like, we really need you to do it. Because the things that you're going to be writing about, the things that you're going to be covering, are things that this community at this time really needs. And in so many words, I can't really, it wasn't as, it's not like I heard the exact language, but it was just this thing transferred to me. And then they showed me a beautiful conifer landscape. And they were like, it's the trees, you know. And so then I was like, of course I had no idea what I was doing, but you know, I had been thinking about it, just thinking about it, and I had returned to my home roots from Los Angeles, and I was on kind of a hiatus. My stuff was in storage, and I came back to spend time with my family. My father was, you know, probably not that far from passing, and my mother, elderly, she needed some home health care through some operations. And so I was like, you know, I've been gone for 18 years, and so hadn't really spent too much time in Astoria except for, you know, holidays, and occasionally when I'd come back, I'd like go to the Colombian Cafe, but really not spending too much time here. So when I did come back, I noticed that, and spent some time here, I noticed that things were, you know, there was a shift happening. Astoria had been through, like the downtown area had been, of course, through the, you know, the loss of business due to the big box stores. And all the stores that used to exist here were just like not really happening anymore through this, you know, after the 70s. It got kind of depressing around here in Astoria. I never thought I would ever move back here. I had no intentions of that, but did want to spend time with my family. And another thing that was happening was that there was an LGBTQ organizing group here, and that totally threw me. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Wow, okay, I've gotta find out about this. And of course there was KMUN, and so there were these beacons of light, but many creative people, many independent creative people, and I thought, wow, I just kind of felt something. It felt like a renaissance, you know. And I don't know if, you know, if I'd just lived here all my life, maybe you couldn't see the forest from the trees, but definitely I could feel this shift happening. And it was exciting. So, and then I met a very wonderful person who happened to be a graphic designer. And we, you know, we became life partners, and made the decision to go forward with the paper. So I also felt, you know, there was this new stuff happening in Astoria, but I feel like, you know, I've always had this inherent connection to an older Astoria. I am a fourth generation Finnish Astorian, and my father's maternal and paternal grandparents moved here from Finland to Astoria, And my mother's parents moved here from Finland to Astoria. And my great-grandfather, Alexander Urell, was one of the original stockholders at the Uniontown Fish Cooperative. And later then he became the manager of cold storage, Pier 39, for 35 years. And all of his offspring, many of his, I think there were like 8, including my grandfather, who worked at Uniontown Fish in management and fishing and all of that. So feeling pretty connected to the fish. Then my mother's parents, my mother's father came to Astoria on the sailing ship, the Clan Galbraith. If you look it up, it's kind of a famous sailing ship. And he was a seaman and liked it here in Astoria, and then sent for my grandmother. And he was a gill netter and also a blacksmith, and eventually owned a little saloon called the Silver Quarter. And my father's parents then became fish tenders, and that is, you're on a boat in 2 minutes left. Wait. You're on a boat in the ocean and you're buying the fish, you're kind of the middleman. So the fisher people are out there, and they traveled, the seas for, most of my father's childhood. So he spent a lot of time out there. And so my father, this is how I became a 4th generation Finnish Astorian. My father was on leave from World War II. He was in the Army Air Corps as a tail gunner. And he was at the famous hot spot in Astoria called Amato, is the supper club. And the bones of Amato still exist today. It's behind JP Plumbing. And if you ask to go in there into their warehouse area, you can still see the arch stage and the surrounding balcony, and it had round tables and tablecloths, and and all kinds of crazy acts came through. My mother was the manager of the Liberty Theater, and so she was there. She had some of her workers there one night, and my father was there. They met, and he asked her if she would like a ride home, and he was with his friend Fred Pekala. And so Fred Pekala and my father got in the car, my mother got in the car, and to bring her home. And Fred Pekala said to my father in Finnish, because my mother was 7 years older than my father, he said, "Isn't she a little old for you?" And not knowing that my mother was Finnish, she answered them back in Finnish, "You could drop me off here at the, at the next car." And that's how I became a 4th generation Finnish Astorian. Thank you.
Hi everyone, really excited to be here tonight and appreciate the opportunity to relay my story on forestry and how I became a forester. I've explained it to Susan, but it was fun for me to get it down on paper and to share it with family and friends, and it was just so, I think it opened up some, even in my family, who didn't, know all the things that had gone on in the past to get me in this field of forestry. So just really appreciate the opportunity to share it here, and also I need to say, you know, this is my story, so I'm here representing myself, not the department. So I've been in forestry for about 30 years, and I always knew I wanted to be in forestry. It was something deep inside. It was I don't know, you know, as a child growing up, we would go out camping, do a lot of foraging out in the woods, whether it was picking salmon berries or blackberries or huckleberries. We just moved throughout the seasons, and then, you know, mushrooms would come up. I didn't eat mushrooms, but man, I loved picking them. You know, you found a big patch of chanterelles, it just made your day. So really enjoyed that. And we would cut firewood when opportunities arose. And there was one time in particular where I was out past Enumclaw, a town called Greenwater, and Forest Service Road 73. Drive in there a few miles off the highway, and my dad and I were cutting firewood, and my brother had kind of wandered off a bit, and he found this trail, and he followed that trail, and he came back and got me when we were done cutting the firewood, and we followed that trail in, and it crossed Mount Rainier boundary, so you were inside the park, and just a few minutes past that, you were at a backcountry camp called Lake Eleanor. And so that became our favorite way to go. We could drive there and set up our tent in about an hour from home. We lived in Kent at the time, and it was just an amazing place to go. And so Mount Rainier had always been a calling to me, and same as forestry. They both have called out to me time and time again. There was a time when I was able to ski in there in the middle of winter, and went further south into a place called Grand Park. And if you've never been there before, it's over a mile square, flat meadow. So to have that to yourself in the middle of winter was awe-inspiring, to say the least. And so I pitched my tent right in the middle. I mean, I could pitch it wherever I wanted, and woke up to an amazing sunrise, and just a beautiful area. So all that time out in the woods, out in the forest, really cemented me wanting to work in forestry. Flash forward a little bit into high school. I went to Kent Ridge High School. Kent Meridian offered a forestry class, so they also allowed a transfer program. So I transferred to that for a few hours each day during my senior year, and that kind of cemented forestry for me. But I was graduating in 1981, and we were going into a deep recession. There were no forestry jobs, so okay, put that on the back burner. I stayed working in the restaurant business, and you know, I'd still, all my free time, I'd go hiking on Mount Rainier, and I'd go hiking, and I'd get back from a hike, and I'd race off. I think some people here will remember you still had to develop your pictures, so I'd race off to the nearest 1 hour photo, get those done so I could take them to work and show everybody, you know, all the cool things I saw. So that was still drawing me out there, still wanting me to get out in forestry. After about a decade, I decided to go back to school for forestry, and enrolled at Green River College in Auburn, Washington. It was a crazy thing because I met the first year students there, and there were 4 of us that went to Kent Ridge that transferred to KM. One of those 4 was in that class ahead of me at Green River, so I just thought that was fate or serendipity, you name it, whatever it was a huge coincidence. So anyway, first day of intro into forestry, they defined silviculture and as the art and science of growing forest, and that grabbed me and hooked me right there. I was like, yeah, this is where I need to be. So I was definitely hooked at that point. After graduating, my first job was hooting for spotted owls. And of course, during that time, it was during the timber wars, it was very controversial. To me, the owls weren't political, they were personal. They helped get me there. I remember up on a landing thinking, wow, I'm using this land to recreate, to cut firewood. How can we do all these things together? So to be able to have that be your first job out of school, it just seemed like it was meant to be. And it just got better from there. You know, I worked for private timber companies doing everything from tree planting on up to final harvest for over a decade. At the start of that, I was in the map room at Champion one day making some maps, and in walks the lead forester there, he was the person who had encouraged me into starting a consulting business. And he walks in with this person he hired, and he's like, Brad, I'd like you to meet Kim. Kim, this is the person I wanted to hire for your job. So we shake hands awkwardly, you know, it was kind of weird. And I went back to work, and Kim would later become my wife. She's the smartest forester I'll ever know. And I say that with all due respect to the great foresters I've worked with throughout my career and continue to work with today. It's an amazing profession, and I've always admired the professionalism and the dedication and the passion that the folks have in forestry. When I first started in Astoria, I always admired the stands that were here. And there was a person, Steve Skinner, that had done his whole career in Astoria, and I was fortunate enough to run into him at the Safeway Starbucks in town and exchanged contact information and asked if he'd like to go out for a tour. He said sure, so we went out, and man, it was one of the greatest trips on the forest roads I could ever imagine. There were two stands that stand out in particular. They were both alder stands that he had planted, and I had pre-commercially thinned those where you remove trees that are too close, give them proper spacing. I was a little apprehensive on taking him out there. I was nervous, but I also wanted his honest opinion. And he was very, very proud of how they were progressing, and so that just made my day out there. There was another time where Kim was talking to another retired forester here, Tom Scoggins, and he said, yeah, I spent almost my whole career here in Astoria. And she was like, really? Why'd you do that? And he says, it's a forester's dream. Why would I leave? And Tom is not wrong. He's exactly right. And I'm envious of the folks that have spent their whole career. There's a lot of folks that do 30 plus all in Astoria. And I wish I could have started then, but my life would be different. So I'm glad it's worked out the way it has. When I hear folks, even today, at different cooperative tree improvement co-ops or contractors that had worked with Steve, and they just still talk about his passion and how much they admired his ethic out there. And I get it, he did amazing things, and it shows out there. And lost my train of thought here, sorry. But I think part of the things with grace that comes into play with forestry is being able to listen and explain what we're doing in forestry. And it has to do as much with the planning and the science as it does to the chainsaws and the cork boots that are out there on the ground. It's also takes courage to stand up when things aren't popular, and to stand up for what's right, and to put forward our long-term goals in such a short-term world that we live in now. In the end, we plant the trees, we do this for the generations to come. I think the things that politicians like Judge Guy Boynton and Governor Sprague back in the 30s and 40s that set up the state forest program with such great foresight, and I'm really proud of that aspect of it. And also, forestry is thinking in generations. It's measured in tree rings and not just, you know, what's there right now in front of you, but what's there for the future. And it takes courage to plant the trees whose shade that we'll never sit under, and to hope that someone someday will be happy that we did. So, thank you.
So it is Thursday, November 4th, 1915. It's an almost fair day. Well, here I am at the island home with Frank. Mr. Coe went down to the Fisher Ranch this morning with his automobile and took me to the station. We left Svensson at 8:45 and arrived at Blind Slough at 9:10. I saw Mr. and Mrs. Webster. He sent me out with a ticket agent in his boat, and we arrived here at 9:45. Frank and Jake were so glad to see me. I hustled around in my old clothes, made biscuits for dinner, cooked potatoes, opened up a can of fruit. The stoves are working, both of them. Well, everything is in piles all around the inside of the house, actually the barn, all over the floor. There's been a big rain, and the men have had a very hard time of it. I will brace up and be a helpmeet if possible.
And that's the first entry in a diary written by Ida Arabelle Curtis Butler in 1915 after their move to Brownsmead Island from the Fisher Ranch. I'm Scott Thompson. This is my wife, Bonnie. And 100 years after that entry, we actually purchased what Ida called the Fisher Ranch, and it's now Blackberry Bog Farm in Swenson. And we want to share with you some of the comparisons of Ida's diary, which was transcribed by her great-granddaughter. It was a daily diary written from 1910 until 1924. Bonnie will read some of the excerpts from the diary, or recall some of the excerpts from the diary, and we will compare that to...
I need to switch mics. Sorry, switch mics.
And we'll compare that to how things are today at the farms that we own.
Okay. So Ida writes every night, and she recalls her first weeks down in what they called the island. At the time, Brownsmead wasn't called Brownsmead yet. It was set up to be a pasture community. There were no roads. They brought everything in by boat. At that time, there was no rail stops on Brownsmead Island. And they talked about the horses getting stuck, the people getting stuck, how hard it was for the kids to try and walk anywhere around the island. There was no schools yet. They actually helped build them. And they had to start everything from scratch. Everything was covered with, brambles and
Spruce forests.
And mud. Lots and lots of mud and dirt.
100 years later, in 2015, we purchased the farm that had been in the Pitcairn family. The Pitcairn family for almost 100 years at that point. And the farm had been abandoned for 15 years. And in 15 years, a lot of things happened, including farms being consumed by blackberries. And so when we arrived at a farm that had two old houses, neither one of which had had electricity for 10 years, covered in blackberries, and trees had fallen down on them. There was no driveway, there were no fences left. I think we got a taste, perhaps, of what Ida and Frank were experiencing when they moved to the island.
They also talk in the diary a lot about trying to figure out how to get things that they need. So they lived someplace at that point in time that had, at first, no railroad station, so they had to rely on boats. A few years later, the Blind Slough Station, which was across to the water, they ended up with a stop in what was called Brody at the time, which you guys would all now be familiar with as Brownsmead. It was a train station in Brownsmead. So when they needed something, they would put a note, quite often on an early morning train, and send it either to Portland or to Astoria, depending on which way the train was going. And then if it was Astoria, they'd quite often get it back that afternoon. Who needs Amazon? It was amazing. It was like, gosh. But if they needed things for the farm, they almost always had to go and find it, usually someplace in the Willamette Valley.
Now this is fraught with peril, though, because the boat that was taking their cream to Astoria to be processed at the creamery here, one of them ran aground and was out of commission she never mentions that boat again.
Yes.
One of them burned to the water line, so there are certainly perils associated with it. The nice thing about the 1915 farms, there were other farmers. There were farming communities, there were farming supplies. Fast forward 100 years, there aren't a lot of farms in in Clatsop County anymore. So we go to that same Willamette Valley now to get supplies for our farm.
But we don't have the trains that stop 4 times a day.
But we don't have the trains, but we do have a truck and we have a road and we have a trailer.
That's
so
true.
there are some advantages.
The train would still be cool.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really would. So.
Now, the Butlers were one of the first to introduce Jersey cattle into Clatsop County. They were the very first to have a registered Jersey cattle. And the Oregon OAS, the Oregon Agricultural School, which then became OSU, recommended jerseys for the climate here. And today we have
Dairy Farm with Jerseys right up the road. It's one of Tillamook Creamery's farms, and it's amazing to think about. They were so excited in the diary talking about getting this first jersey, and they didn't know what to do with them, so they invited guest speakers to come to the Brownsmead Grange and to teach them about Jersey cows. And so, I mean, it's so amazing to think about, how many cows there are now in Brownsmead, and that these guys were the first ones that were really trying to figure out how to raise cows down there.
They were also very excited to have a power mechanized milking machine.
Yes, they were.
Because they could then double their herd size from 6 to 12 cows. And
Although that machine broke down more often than I think it worked.
When the machine broke down, then of course they had to milk all 12 cows by hand.
Yeah. So what we've learned reading Ida's diary is it really takes a community to farm around Clatsop County. And they had a really amazing one. They would leave and go off to a show. They showed their Jersey cows, all over the state.
At the Clatsop County Fair in Gearhart,
Yeah.
when it was held there.
Yeah, even up into Portland at times.
Portland.
But somebody would always jump in and milk the cows for them, or feed the pigs, or do all of those things. And so it's been kind of amazing as we've tried to build. We've got now the largest farm, one of the largest farms, non-dairy farms in Clatsop County. Trying to figure out how to farm on your own when there aren't a lot of people with that experience and background here has made us a little nostalgic for 100 years ago, when there was much more of a farming community just doors away from where we currently have our second farm in Brownsmead now.
And as we prepared for this storytelling, we talked about how do we end the story. And I think that we don't know yet, because the story is evolving. And when we purchased the farm 10 years ago, we never imagined that we would be serving 100 people a week with produce baskets, that we would have a farm stand, or anything like that. And so we look ahead, and we don't know how the story ends,
Yeah.
but we appreciate you listening to it.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. You're wondering why I'm bare feet. So those are offering to the story. My name is Lam Quang. I came to the States about 50 years ago at the end of the American War. You call it Vietnam War, but we call it the American War. We had wars against many colonizers throughout the time. Brief story, April 28th, 1975, we got words that we get to go, we get to leave. And we went out to go shopping. And I chose a pair of shoes that was way too small for my feet, but I liked it and I didn't care. And so 2 days later, we were on a plane, on the cargo plane in the tarmac of the Saigon airport. It was hot, it was humid, it was in a military cargo plane. We are sitting packed in and waiting for the plane to take off. And the North Vietnamese army was moving in fast. They were coming around a lot, and as we're sitting on the plane, we can hear the mortars going off from afar. And this is kind of fairly regular thing that happens a lot when the North Vietnam started moving in, and we go boom, boom, boom. So the Americans and the South Vietnamese army trying to fend them off, and we're on this plane, basically the last plane to leave, and sitting there, I was like, I'm going to America. 14, I get to choose, chosen to go, and I was just dreaming from the Sears catalog we used to get, like all these beautiful houses, manicured lawns and flowers, and toys, bicycle, 10-speed bicycle. We've never heard such a thing, 10-speed bicycles. Man, America, the land of the dream. Golden Mountain. So we finally we got to take off. The plane lifted off. Nothing happened. I think we may have been shot at, but nothing happened. We left. We left the world just in chaos. I mean, after that, it was just helicopter lifts and people who can get on the rooftop of the embassy. You get lift off from there, from the Americans. And then once it got too dangerous, that stopped. And after that, people, however they can, get on boats and fleeing the atrocity that was about to come to them. And anybody that has connections with the South Vietnamese army or the Americans or any foreigners just had to leave because they were being persecuted, prosecuted, and executed. That happened fairly regularly if you have enough of connections. And my mother did. So my mother, so this is a story mostly about her. She had gone to the French colonial time in her youth. And my family was so poor, my grandfather was so cruel that he sold her to domestic slavery because his wife died, and so sold her off, and then she somehow escaped and had to work. Eventually, had to work in the rubber plantation, just toiling in the heat rubber plantations. And eventually met my father, and they were married and had 6 children. And by the time that he was killed, he wasn't a very good man. So it's kind of a blessing. And I think it's so hard to be a good man, a good person, when there's so much cruelty inflicted upon you all the time. And just imagine living to an abusive household, just getting smacked around all the time. And the dignity and the humanity that just taken away from you, and you take it out on people that is yours inferior, it's like your kids and whoever. But so my mother already had six kids, and she went to work, found work as a bar girl, and that was much better. She made connections with soldiers and all sorts of people, made enough money to got us out of the highlands and moved us into Saigon. And in Saigon, she again continued that craft. She was so good at making the connections and using her grace and her ability to attract these people. And she already had 6 kids, imagine. Trying to attract 19 to 25-year-old soldiers to come and do your bidding, basically. So anyway, she made enough money, the connections to get us out. And bribery was really the way to go. And if you don't give the right people the money, you don't get to have anything. And she made enough money and connection to get us out. She is now living in Michigan, 92 years old, by herself. She did not want to live with any of us. And her American husband died, and she said, "No, I'm not going to live with you guys. You guys do not let me do what I want to do," and vice versa. So anyway, she's up there by herself, and so I just went to visit recently, and gave her this ceremonial foot bath. I wash her feet and thank her for that. So now I'm kind of switching gear a bit, talk about here and now. So to tell that story, it's just kind of a projecting and to tell what could happen to when things go really badly. And the parallel with what went on there and what going on here is pretty uncanny and much bigger level than we have ever seen before. And as an immigrant, I'm not that worried for me, and especially out here, but there's people everywhere. It's getting, taken away. It's like, come on. So what I want to do here is what we have here in Astoria is just amazing. People like the farmers and artists and chefs everywhere. There are so many beautifully talented people that willing to give. And the large thing that I see is that we don't have a full ability housing. We need to come together, somehow figure out how we can come up with live workspace for young artists and whoever that needs it, and to continue this community. And I have had a space in Portland before, and it was so great. I had really inexpensive rent, and I was able to culture my creativity and make it work. And my hope and my dream is that it can happen here, to where people can afford and be able to still live here. Because I mean, look around, it's just like there's so many people. I love the creativity everywhere. It's just amazing. So, to end this, since Dinah's saying, I'm going to try this thing. This is a little, whew. But I think you all like this. I think you all can relate to this. When the night has come and the land is dark and the moonlight is the only thing you see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. That's what it's talking about.